Come March, the icy rinks of Prague won't see Alysa Liu's skates touch the surface. That massive Milan arena just went dead quiet for a few agonizing seconds. But quiet isn't really the right word for it. This wasn't some peaceful, empty room stillness. No, it was that weirdly heavy, suffocating pressure you only find at the Olympics. It's that rare, heavy stillness that happens when 15,000 people from every corner of the planet collectively hold their breath at the exact same time. You could practically feel the air thick, charged with electricity, and vibrating with a level of focus so intense it felt physical. The track cut. That last, lingering note had finally drifted up and vanished into the rafters high above. There stood Alysa Liu, right in the center of the rink, her shoulders heaving in jagged rhythms while she fought to catch her breath. She didn't even feel the rink's biting cold anymore. Instead, the intense, scorching heat of the spotlights hammered down on her shimmering gold dress. Just 20 years old. And there she was, completely alone in the middle of that massive, blindingly white sheet of ice. So she waited. She stood there waiting for the specific set of numbers that would define the rest of her existence. Those digits were about to mark one of the most incredible, history-making moments in the entire legacy of American athletics. Suddenly, the massive scoreboard overhead flashed to life. The numbers hit the screen. And in that heartbeat, the whole world just shifted. That heavy silence? Gone. Smashed into a million tiny fragments. The arena exploded. A sound so massive and deafening it hit you like a physical wall, a collective scream of pure, unfiltered joy and total shock. Over by the barrier, her coaches, Philip DeGulmo and Massa Mascali, shot up into the air. They were screaming at the top of their lungs, faces twisted, though the stadium's roar drowned out every single word. Cameras on giant robotic arms swung around violently, diving toward the kiss and cry area, hungry to catch every bit of that raw, messy human emotion. Right in the middle of that blinding explosion of noise and light, Alysa Liu just folded. Both hands flew to her mouth while she stared at the screen, eyes wide, appearing as if she needed a physical jolt to believe what she was seeing was actually happening. Olympic gold! For an American skater. Finally, those words held a massive, historic weight, the kind of significance that anyone in the skating world felt deep down in their soul. We're talking over 20 years since a woman from the United States had actually claimed that top spot on the Olympic podium. 24 long, painful years defined by heartbreaking losses, close calls, ruined dreams, and promises that never quite panned out. You have to go back to 2002 to find the last time the anthem played for a female American skater. That was when a young Sarah Hughes shocked everyone in Salt Lake City. In the years since that night in Utah, a whole new generation had literally been born, raised, and started their own careers in the rink. Group after group of American girls had tied their laces, forced to carry the crushing weight of being labeled the next big thing. They'd been so close. Frequently. They grabbed world medals. They crushed it at nationals. But when the Olympic lights were at their brightest, the gold always seemed to slip away at the last second. Maybe it was a botched jump or a nasty fall either way. The massive pressure of a nation's hopes usually broke them right at the end. Until Milan happened. Enter Alysa Liu. The wildest part of her victory? The girl who finally killed that 25-year curse wasn't the one the experts, the data, or the big names ever expected to win. Honestly, if you look back just a couple of years, the trajectory Alysa Liu was on seemed completely heartbreakingly different than where she is now, because for a while there, she wasn't seen as the future of the sport. She was viewed as a warning of what not to do. To really get why Milan was such a big deal, you've got to look at the dark times she had to survive first. You need to realize what happens when you're called a prodigy in a world that eats kids alive and tosses them aside before they can even vote. Alysa Liu exploded onto the international stage when she was just a 13-year-old superstar. This little, always smiling kid from California was pulling off stunts on the ice that no other American woman had ever even attempted. She was hitting triple axels and quad lutzes like it was nothing. Predictably, the media circus went absolutely wild for her. The press loved it. The savior of American skating was here. But those shiny headlines brought a hidden, soul-crushing pressure along with them. Suddenly, this young girl was lugging around the financial dreams and emotional weight of an entire sports federation on her shoulders. She was bound to burn out. Between the constant media tours, the insane expectations, and the physical wreckage of throwing a developing body into the air thousands of times, it was just too much. Toss in some messy coaching drama, and everything spiraled way faster than anyone could have ever hoped to control. She actually fought her way to the 2022 Beijing Games through injuries and the height of the pandemic, eventually finishing in 7th place. 1 month later, she walked away from the World Championships with bronze. Then, at only 16 in age, when most teens are just sweating their driving test, Alysa Liu pulled a stunner. She quit. Cold turkey. Retirement was official. She stashed her skates, cut ties with the rink, and took a dive into the scary, ordinary world of being a regular kid. Back then, the entire skating community felt like they'd lost a once-in-a-lifetime star. Rumors swirled that her time was up for good. People figured the sport had finally just snapped her. Everyone swore she'd never land another jump. They were dead wrong. But when she finally staged a comeback years later, the hype was notably and heavily guarded. Gold wasn't even in the conversation. The experts just weren't buying it. Critics questioned if her frame could still survive the punishing physics that skating demands. People doubted if that internal spark, the grit needed for the Olympic pressure cooker, was still there. Was she actually back for the long haul? Or was this just some brief, nostalgic trip down memory lane? Everyone was guessing. But something deep had shifted while she was away. If you looked closely at the Grand Prix events before the Milan Olympics, and if you ignored the points to focus on her movement, you could see the signs. Tiny, silent, yet obvious clues. Her routines felt totally new, much more relaxed, and incredibly measured. Her jumps were still crisp, sure, but the way she moved had this entirely fresh layer of self-assurance. That panicky, please love me vibe of a kid performing for a table of judges? Totally gone. She had the steady, commanding aura of a woman skating for her own joy. Less frantic energy, way more soul. She stopped trying to outrun the shadows of icons like Sarah Hughes or Michelle Kwan. She was finally just comfortable in her own skin. That kind of mental shift doesn't always land in the big headlines, but those inside the tight-knit skating world caught on immediately. Other coaches definitely saw it. Her rivals saw it too. By the February 2026 Olympic Finals, Alysa Liu wasn't just some skater scrapping for a top 5 finish anymore. She performed like a person who knew exactly how monumental this specific moment really was. It was the performance of someone who'd faced the sport's ugliest sides and come out the other side. That night in Milan, everything just clicked. It was a 4-minute clinic on how to mix raw athleticism with pure art. Every landing was flawless, her blades slicing through the ice with that distinctive, sharp, ripping silk sound. Each transition felt effortless. Those routines born in frigid, empty rinks months ago, hidden from every fan, played out exactly the way she had dreamed they would. She stepped out in a shimmering gold dress that grabbed every spotlight and threw it right back onto the ice. When she hit that final pose and the music dissolved into the crowd's roar, even the veteran TV announcers seemed completely and utterly speechless for a second. They didn't even know how to start describing what they'd just seen. Magic like that rarely happens in the world of figure skating. Often, you get a routine that's technically perfect and full of hard jumps, but it lacks any real heart. Other times, a performance is a total tearjerker but gets ruined by a clumsy trip or a hard fall. It's so rare for the tech, the emotion, the music, and the history to all collide at the exact same time. But that night in Milan, it happened. Alysa Liu truly caught lightning in a bottle, and that is precisely why her next move left the whole sports world absolutely floored. Just weeks after reaching her ultimate goal and becoming the most famous, talked about, and sought-after figure skater on the planet, Alysa Liu made a massive decision that absolutely nobody in the world saw coming. She withdrew from the World Championships. She simply turned down the trip to Prague. Early on, the reason given seemed pretty straightforward, maybe even a bit too basic. But as people dug into the timing of her choice and the champion's own headspace, the entire narrative started getting a whole lot more complicated and messy. New questions finally started bubbling up. These issues would eventually lead right back to the skating union, the press, and the scary reality of instant, overwhelming fame. News of her pulling out didn't come with some big, flashy announcement. We didn't get a crying press conference or some long, dramatic essay sent out to the major sports channels. No fancy, tear-jerking goodbye video was uploaded to any of her social media pages. Instead, it was just a low-key, almost formal notice that started circulating among a tight-knit circle of skating reporters early one Monday morning. Alysa Liu was officially skipping the 2026 World Championships in Prague. From the outside looking in, well, it just seemed like business as usual. Top-tier skaters drop out of Worlds post-Olympics all the time because that whole season is a total meat grinder. It is a relentless, soul-crushing gauntlet that leaves you physically and mentally fried. We are talking months of constant flying, brutal jet lag, an endless media circus, and training that pushes the human body right to the edge. By the time that Olympic flame finally goes out, most skaters are just physically broken and completely drained. So when word got out she was pulling out, the skating world just gave a collective, understanding nod. It made total sense. Look, she had already conquered the summit. The gold medalist had earned her right to head home, hang up the skates for a bit, and actually breathe. But if you really listened to the quiet chatter in the rinks that day, you realized it was not that simple. Because Alysa Liu was not just some tired athlete wrapping up a long winter. She had just been crowned the undisputed global face of the entire winter sports world. She was America's new Golden Girl, and the timing of her exit raised eyebrows instantly, especially with Worlds in Prague set to start on March 24th. That meant her formal no came only a few short weeks after the medals were handed out in Milan. Purely looking at the logistics and her physical health, yeah, she definitely could have been there. Honestly, most medalists do exactly that. They ride that massive high and momentum from the games straight into the next competition. Following up an Olympic win with a world title just a month later is the ultimate power move for a legend. It is the victory lap. But Liu just walked away quietly and firmly, without any messy drama or public scandals. No ugly public bickering with her federation either. Zero gossip from her coaching camp either. Just a brief, classy note from her circle suggesting that the post-Olympic whirlwind had become totally overwhelming and she simply needed some time to breathe. And that explanation was clearly real. Snagging Olympic gold at 20 years old does not just change where your career is going. It basically nukes your old life and builds a brand new, unrecognizable reality overnight. The second that gold hits your chest, the storm begins. Morning shows are calling for interviews at 4 in the morning. Late-night hosts want you on their couch for some charming banter while you fly across continents on a non-stop media tour. Big-name sponsors are hounding your agent at all hours, throwing millions around just to use your face for a second. High-end fashion houses want you in their dresses. Even the politicians are desperate for a photo. Suddenly, this girl who used to just train quietly in some freezing cold California rink, a girl who just wanted to skate, becomes one of the most famous people on the planet. You can't even go grocery shopping anymore. Forget about grabbing coffee with a friend without some random person shoving a camera in your face. Right after her big win in Milan, Alysa's calendar filled up way faster than her management team ever thought possible. But something else went down during that crazy time, something really creepy that the public did not hear about until much later. According to some whispers that finally came out after she withdrew, Liu dealt with a seriously disturbing run-in with a fan while she was traveling right after the Olympics. It was not violent, and she was not physically hurt, but it was aggressive and creepy enough to totally ruin her sense of safety. It was a scary, real-world wake-up call. It made it painfully clear that her new life as a legendary champion had arrived, and it came with a dark, suffocating loss of privacy. When you are only 20 and you have already seen the ugly side of fame as a young prodigy, well, moments like that terrifying airport run-in really change the way you look at the spotlight. It triggers a pure survival instinct. So, by the time her Prague exit was official, the people who actually know the skating world understood the deep logic behind it. It was about self-preservation, resting, resetting, and protecting her mental health, her safety, and the future of her career. Honestly, it was the most grown-up, responsible move a young star could ever make. Yet, even with all that logic, there was still this weird feeling hanging over the whole situation. Because while Alysa Liu would not be on the ice in Prague, her ghostly influence over the event seemed to grow bigger every single day. She wasn't physically there, yet her presence was inescapable. Commentators simply couldn't stop obsessing over her being gone. On every single sports show, experts argued whether Prague even mattered without the undisputed Ice Queen. Fans turned internet forums into a war zone, debating if a new world champion could ever be legitimate without beating the Olympic winner. The International Skating Union. The guys running the show were secretly panicking, wondering how on earth they'd market a world championship broadcast when their most profitable, iconic star was suddenly a no-show. Then, about a week after she dropped out, something happened that basically nuked the conversation and flipped the script entirely. The International Skating Union dropped an official list. Initially, it seemed simple. It looked like another boring press release about the upcoming event, just some standard administrative paperwork. But as soon as journalists and fans actually read those names, it became shockingly clear. Alysa's journey in Prague was far from over. Honestly, the chaos was only starting. By the time the Milan Olympic fire was out, Alysa's life was already spinning out of control at a breakneck pace. Look, Olympic winners don't just walk away with gold. They get shoved into a whole different social stratosphere. That shift is brutal and faster than any athlete can process, even her. Days after that perfect skate in Italy, Liu was a household name. She wasn't just a sports story anymore, she was a cultural phenomenon. Her image took over Times Square, and that iconic final spin racked up hundreds of millions of views across every single social app. She was the savior who finally ended America's 24-year gold medal drought. The ultimate comeback. For the skating higher-ups, this looked like the start of a massive, money-making new era. They finally had a star. But Alysa? She saw things differently. It felt like her peace had died instantly. No more quiet, 5 a.m. training sessions. No more blades biting into glass-smooth ice. No more frozen air hitting her chest. That solitary deep focus that fueled her return was just gone, replaced by a relentless grind of obligations. That's the tragedy people watching from their couches never see when a champion is crying on that podium. Behind that cinematic winning moment is a human whose life is suddenly no longer their own. And for someone who'd already survived a massive burnout, this loss of agency was a huge, screaming red flag. The insiders, the ones who really knew skating, remembered her past very well. They hadn't forgotten her quitting at 16. Back then she was blunt. The elite-level pressure and the demands of the adults around her were just poisonous. When she walked away, people basically agreed she was just trying to survive. So when she finally returned, her coaches saw she'd built a much tougher mental shield this time. This comeback wasn't about the federation or winning gold or setting some point record. It was about skating for herself again, just to see if she could actually find joy on the ice. That mindset is exactly why she could handle the insanity of Milan and pull off that incredible performance. She was untouchable because the external chatter didn't matter anymore. But high-level success brings a new, louder type of noise. Be the face of a sport and the pressure triples. Fans want you at every competition. TV networks build their entire marketing world around your face. Sponsors want to see the money they spent actually paying off. In the middle of that storm, The athlete is still just a person trying to figure out their next move. And for Alysa Liu, following the expected path was never the plan. In those weeks right after the Olympics, the skating world noticed something weird. Total silence from her camp. While rivals from Russia and Japan were spamming training clips and talking up Prague, Liu's socials were a ghost town. There wasn't a single training update. No choreography teasers, no hints of new routines, nothing to even suggest she was still skating. Nothing but pure, heavy silence. That quiet didn't necessarily mean things had gone south, but it was a massive sign that her choice regarding Worlds was extremely deliberate. Walking away right after you have conquered the highest peak of human sport is about way more than just grabbing some extra sleep. It is about staring down your brand new reality and trying to make sense of it all. It is looking in the glass and seeing that the girl who started this whole journey is gone, replaced by a world-famous icon. She transformed from a quiet comeback story to the literal queen of the ice in just 3 months. That kind of mental whiplash leads to some brutal choices. So, when word finally came that she would not be on that plane to the Czech Republic, the real pros knew it was a total boss move. This was a break dictated entirely by her, not an ending forced on her by the sport itself. But then, just 10 days before the first skater was set to touch the ice in Prague, the ISU dropped an absolute bombshell. And suddenly, even from thousands of miles away, Alysa Liu completely took over the entire World Championship conversation. The Skating Federation put out the official list of nominees for their big annual award ceremony. Normally, this gala held on the final night of the World Championships is a stiff, kind of dull industry event. It's an industry pat on the back that most casual fans do not even know is happening. It usually passes without much noise, until now. Because the second the media and the fans started looking at that list, one single name just leaped off the page. The name just kept popping up again and again. Alysa Liu, which was honestly pretty weird for one very simple, very obvious reason. She wasn't even in the country. She wasn't even skating in the event. And yet, her unforgettable Olympic free skate, her loyal coaching staff, and the brilliant creative minds that built her Milan performance were suddenly the only things anyone was talking about before heading into Prague. The first huge point of conversation was the nod for best costume. If you saw that women's final in Milan, you do not need a single photograph to remember that dress. It is locked in your brain, a wild, shimmering gold that didn't look like a stiff pageant gown, it actually flowed. It was a high-fashion athletic masterpiece that grabbed those arena lights and just shattered them into a million pieces. It moved so differently compared to the usual rhinestone-covered armor that most of these skaters have to wear. The designers made it look like liquid metal to highlight her movement instead of just being some glittery, sparkly distraction. In those ultra-slow-motion shots from the Olympic broadcast, you saw the fabric obey the raw, violent physics of her jumps, almost like a visual extension of the music's soaring score. That dress was legendary. The nomination was a total no-brainer. Then came the second name tied forever to Liu's Olympic fame, Massimo Scali. Scali got the nod for the world's best choreographer. The former Italian dancer had already built a massive name for himself in the tight-knit world of professional skating. He was famous for making routines that balanced scary hard technical moves with deeply emotional storytelling. But what he did for Alysa's Olympic skate turned him from a respected pro into a total, undisputed legend. Seasoned commentators and even the meanest critics called the program a true, once-in-a-generation masterpiece. It was one of those rare, magical bits of time where the sheer physical grind of the sport, the beautiful, haunting swell of the music, and the raw athletic power just fused into one perfect work of art. The moves between her big jumps were crazy hard, yet they looked smooth as silk to anyone watching from the stands. Nothing felt rushed or panicked against the ticking clock. That entire 4-minute skate actually had room to breathe. It played out like a movie narrative, not just some cold list of tricks being checked off by a judge with a clipboard. Everyone in the skating world cheered for Scali's nomination. Then there was the best coach nod handed out to Filippo Di Elmo. To get this, you have to understand how intense the bond between a skater and their coach really is. It isn't some guy yelling plays from a sideline. It is a deep, daily, and incredibly emotional partnership. They are on the ice every single day, usually long before the sun even thinks about rising. These programs are built, ripped apart, and started over again piece by piece over a whole year of work. A microscopic 1 mm shift in the angle of a skater's blade is the literal difference between winning a historic gold and a devastating bone-bruising fall for a 20-year-old athlete. Especially one carrying the weight of past burnout and the massive expectations of the American public through the pure hellfire of an Olympic season. Getting her to peak for those specific 4 minutes in Milan, pure brilliance, part psychological wizardry, part technical perfection. That kind of magic doesn't just happen. Guglielmo's nod was basically a standing ovation for the ironclad sanctuary he built around his star. But as fans poured over the official ISU award list, a massive, glaring hole began to swallow the excitement. Something was gone. Specifically, the very Olympic free skate that handed Alysa Liu her gold. The one that broke the internet. The one that owned every sports page on the planet for weeks on end. It was the routine that had full-grown men weeping in the Milan stands, yet it was snubbed from the most entertaining category. Fans caught it instantly. And trust me, in today's figure skating world, you do not want to cross the fans. The internet didn't just react, it caught fire. What started on Twitter and Reddit exploded into a full-scale digital insurgency. Within hours, the hashtag was trending everywhere. A few calm voices in the media tried to play it off as a simple clerical mistake by the committee. But the skating community is famously cynical and deeply passionate. They weren't buying that for a second. They immediately smelled the stench of the sport's notoriously dark and messy political games. Skating has always fought this ghost. It's a world where cold, hard athletic feats crash headfirst into subjective human judging. Artistry gets sliced up in locked rooms. National federations carry their bitter grudges for literally decades. People started asking, was the ISU punishing Alysa for skipping their big world championship show? Was this snub just a petty act of institutional revenge for her absence? Whatever the motive, the ISU's plan to leave her out blew up in their faces. It triggered a situation that was totally unprecedented and completely off the rails. Without even tying her laces or touching down in the Czech Republic, Alysa Liu became the main character of the Prague Worlds. Her name was the only thing anyone talked about regarding the awards. Furious fans started spamming her Olympic program everywhere just to make a point to the officials. Then things really hit the fan because the ISU, trying to look modern, had let the public vote. This put the power right into the hands of the people sitting at home. The millions who cheered for Liu's comeback could now rewrite the history of this 2026 season. The moment the voting portal went live, magic happened. The clock was ticking toward March 18th, the hard cutoff for the ISU Awards, right before the opening in Prague. Usually, this deadline is just some boring fine print that nobody outside the hardcore skating bubble cares about. But this year was a whole different beast. Across the global skating world, that March 18th deadline turned into a massive digital battle cry. It became a lighthouse for a fan base that felt they needed to protect their champion's legacy. After watching her build her confidence and seeing that spectacular gold medal triumph, her fans used this vote as a weapon to support her gutsy choice to prioritize her mental health. The voting booth became their weapon, and the process? Purely effortless. You hit the ISU site, clicked for Best Costume, Choreographer, and Coach, and you were done. But those clicks felt like a rebellion, because everyone voting knew the score. Alysa Liu wasn't going to show up in Prague. She wouldn't be pacing those freezing backstage halls with her headphones on, getting in the zone. She wouldn't be clutching a lucky stuffed animal in the kiss and cry while waiting for the scores. She wouldn't even be in the building when they crowned the new women's world champion. Still, Her ghost was everywhere, haunting the calculated tones of every single TV commentator. Every time a network ran a preview for the women's event, the analysts had to say the same thing. Naturally, the reigning Olympic gold medalist, the American Alysa Liu, has opted not to compete this week. Nobody ever came out and said it. It was just this colossal, undeniable truth that totally shifted the weight of the entire competition. Without the powerhouse that is Liu out there, the Prague lineup became a total free-for-all, a pure power vacuum. Athletes who had spent months mentally prepping to fight for a silver or bronze were suddenly waking up in their Prague hotel rooms facing a completely different reality. They actually had a real, out-of-nowhere chance to be world champions. For the rest of the Americans, like the high-energy Amber Glenn and the incredibly expressive Isabelo Levito, losing their star teammate created a massive golden opportunity, but it also invited a strange, creeping kind of heavy mental pressure. Becoming a world champion is huge. It changes your life and etches your name in the books forever. But taking gold right after the Olympics, when the actual champion just skipped out, well, that changes the story. Regardless of how perfect they were in Prague, they knew the press and the haters would put an invisible asterisk right next to that win. Everyone would ask the same whispery question, yeah, but would they have won if Alysa was there? That's just the cold, hard reality of sports. Sometimes the champion who isn't there is louder than the person standing on the top step. But the wheels of the sport never stop turning. Prague was going to happen no matter what. The ice gets resurfaced. The judges sit down. A new girl gets the crown and her anthem fills the arena. There would be stunning performances, and some young careers were about to change in ways nobody could see coming. Yet, somewhere in there, hiding just behind the bright lights and the shiny medals in Prague, was one huge nagging question. It was on everyone's mind, from the fans to the officials. What is the future for Alysa Liu? Because dipping out of Worlds right after winning Olympic gold, that is a move that can mean several very different things. Maybe it is like her camp said, she just desperately needs to heal, both physically and mentally. The skater takes a real break, lets the body recover, and comes back next year refreshed, hungry, and ready to dominate another 4-year Olympic cycle. Sometimes it's a permanent shift away from the elite grind and a pivot toward the high-paying world of professional skating shows, corporate sponsors, and media deals. She trades the stress of being judged for the love of a crowd on a world tour. But every so often, and fans are scared to even say this, yet something else is happening. A move like this can be the quiet, unofficial start of never coming back at all. At only 20 years old, Alysa stands at a wild, scary crossroads that almost nobody, including other pros, will ever truly understand. She already hit the peak. She achieved the ultimate dream of the sport. She's got the Olympic gold. There isn't a higher peak to reach or a bigger score to chase. Everything that happens next in her life, whether she ever laces up her skates again or not, will happen exactly on her own terms. She's the one with all the power. Looking at the whole arc of her journey, that might be the most incredible part. For years, the brutal world of skating has followed this predictable and honestly pretty sad pattern. A young phenom comes out of nowhere, and the press immediately names her the next big thing. She hunts for medals, pushing her body and mind through crazy stress until the injuries or the heavy public pressure finally snap her spirit completely, pushing her out of the light and into a silent retirement. But Alysa Liu doesn't do scripts. She flat out refused to become another sad story. She quit a toxic scene once already to save herself, then came back stronger and totally on her own. She stunned everyone with that gold, especially since the experts thought she was finished years and years ago. And right now, having just conquered the entire sport, she has decided she has every right to just stop for a second. Maybe this is just a quick breather and we will see her back next year, skating a new program and defending her legacy. Or maybe this is just the ultimate mic drop from a young woman, knowing she owes the ice absolutely nothing and choosing to walk away as a permanent, undisputed champion. Right now, only the few in her tiny inner circle actually know the truth. But here is the one thing we know for sure. When the broadcast finally goes live in Prague, when those arena lights blind the crowd for the 2026 Worlds, figure skating will try its best to keep spinning. Announcers will scream about the rookies. Judges are going to hand out some shiny new hardware to the next kids. Fresh ice will witness its fair share of gutsy wins and crushing losses. But the real talk, the pulse of this sport in 2026, stays completely locked in the orbit of just one person, the legendary Alysa Liu. And the truth is, the next page of her wild journey hasn't even been written yet.